I've agreed that we will hear one deputation this evening. It's from Edward Stanners and residents of Highgate, and it relates to traffic restrictions on Swain's Lane. Mr. Stanners, you have 3 minutes to address the council. Mr. Stanners, are you here?
Madam Mayor, yes, can you hear me?
Yes. Over to you.
Madam Mayor, ladies and gentlemen of the council, thank you for inviting us to present our case this evening. Since July 1st, around 25 households which live on or near Pond Square, Highgate, have been protesting about 2 new no right turns which were introduced without consultation at the top of Swain's Lane. We hope to persuade you to abandon the scheme and go back to a more formal system of consultation. Recently, our 25 households have joined forces with other Highgate groups such that our arguments probably coincide with those of around 200 households. As far as we know, none of those households was consulted on this scheme. This despite Highgate having 3 well-established residents' associations and 2 very well-respected membership bodies, the Highgate Society and the HLSI. Swain's Lane is a narrow, steep road which runs between 2 sides of Highgate Cemetery. It is used by vehicles as a rat run, but also allows the residents who live on the lane itself, Bisham Gardens, to access their homes. It also is used to access 2 of the 4 pedestrian entrances into Waterloo Park. Less significantly, it is used by an elite band of cyclists for time trials. It is the steepest hill in London and is far too steep for normal mortals to pedal up. The signs were intended to reduce traffic so that pedestrians using the top of Swain's Lane could distance themselves more easily post-COVID. Safe Travel Camden tell us that between 1,500 and 2,000 cars were using the lane every day, and our measurements tend to agree with that. COVID distancing has become no easier as a result of this measure. Vehicles can no longer turn into Bisham Gardens or into South Grove, meaning that they are obliged to go into Pond Square, which is the hub of Highgate. It is the pedestrian hub of Highgate, and it is where many of our citizens cross to go to shops or to go to catch the bus. We have calculated that the additional mileage cars now have to do as a result of this scheme is the equivalent of between 6 and 12 brand new cars being put on the road. Safe Travel Camden have not refuted that, which suggests that our figures are accurate. The scheme is endangering the lives of both Highgate residents and its many visitors. The risk to life, limb, and the lungs of those who work, live, and relax near the square far outweighs the very arguable benefits brought to the relatively few Swain's Lane pedestrians. We agree that car use has to be brought down dramatically. We just want this scheme to be rethought in a way which ensures full and fair consultation, and hope to persuade you that there are better ways of achieving the scheme's original objective. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you so much. I'll move on to members. I've had some indications from members who wish to ask questions or of the deputy. I have indications from Councillor Pearson, Councillor Wright, Councillor Newman, Councillor Sian Berry. Can we ask in that order? And please remember to keep within the 3 minutes. Councillor Pearson.
Councillor Pearson here. Thank you very much, Edward. I've listened to what you have to say, and I must say some of it I do agree with. I am a cyclist. I don't consider myself an elite cyclist. I'm of pensionable age, so I declare that I have used Swain's Lane, cycling up it for many years. I do it about once a week. It's as you say, it's the toughest local hill, and it's usually quieter than Highgate West Hill, Highgate Hill, the obvious alternatives. However, as you say, it is a well-known rat run for car and van drivers who presumably think they can save a small amount of time rather than using Highgate West Hill or Highgate Hill, or if they're travelling further afield, Archway Road. In doing so, at surprisingly high speed and emitting exhaust fumes, as you say, trapped between the high brick walls, they inconvenience and even endanger not only the considerable number of pedestrians and not only recreational but also commuting cyclists, considerable number of pedestrians on the narrow pavements, including many families who are accessing Waterloo Park, the tennis courts, and both cemeteries, east and west. Actually, I've observed the cemetery visitors are often tourists, ignorant of local traffic dangers, and they frequently spill out of the East Cemetery, putting themselves at risk. I believe the option of closing the road to motor vehicles completely north of the cemetery gates was ruled out as too impractical for the residents who live on the west side above that point. So banning right turns into Bisham Gardens and South Grove was considered the next best thing.
Councillor Pearson, sorry to interrupt you. It's actually 3 minutes for everyone. So do you mind wrapping up your question to the deputy?
Okay, so I believe motorists will fairly soon realise that they're not saving themselves any time by using Swain's Lane. Assuming that to be the case, I believe the congestion will subside in South Grove. I have to ask you, surely you have you not noticed a considerable drop in traffic from the 1,500 to 2,000 cars a day that you mentioned? I went up this morning and I was passed by a total of 3 vehicles. Thank you.
Thank you, and I agree with quite a lot of what you've just said.
Sorry, Edward. Shall I take maybe one more question and then you can respond to both?
Right.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's okay.
Can I take a brief question from Councillor Wright, please?
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor, and thank you for the deputation. As one of the ward councillors for Highgate, I'm very, very aware of strong feelings on this issue and on other issues of traffic across the Dartmouth Park area, and I've received many messages from residents on the subject. And so views do seem to be very mixed. I think one of the things I hope is a potential benefit of these experimental traffic orders is that they are indeed experiments and that they should be treated as such. And so residents do have an opportunity, seeing how these efforts are actually working, to gather evidence in real time, seeing what's really happening and feed that back. So my question really to Councillor Harrison, the Cabinet member responsible, is that can I ask on behalf of residents that Camden really communicate clearly with residents about the opportunities for sharing feedback on the schemes, and that we be sure that there is full consultation at the end of the scheme with the very real possibility of tweaks and changes, the opportunity for making some of these experiments permanent should residents agree and should we feel that's beneficial, but also to revoke them if not. And can we be assured that that process is open and transparent and that residents are being listened to and that the schemes are not necessarily a done deal and permanent, because they are indeed meant to be experiments and pilots.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. I'm going to take 2 more very brief questions and then the deputy can respond to all of the questions at the end. May I take a question from Councillor Newman and then Councillor Berry?
Thank you very much for the deputation, Edward. I've got 3 very quick points. You mentioned, I think, obviously the scheme will have a wider effect than just the immediate area affected. Do you have evidence from residents of roads other than Pond Square that they also agree with the points you've made? Secondly, you mentioned the risk of an accident, which I think it must be a very big concern. I'd like to know about evidence of accidents or near misses. If you've got anything to say in that direction, that would be most interesting. And then finally, you mentioned quite a lot of numbers supporting your deputation, which I think is quite important, in particular in relation to the route without a right turn being so much longer. How sure are you of those numbers that you presented this evening? Thank you.
Over to Councillor Berry. One final brief question to Mr. Stanners.
Thank you. Yes, I'm obviously a ward councillor and I'm well aware of this scheme, and I've been corresponding with some of the residents on Bisham Gardens, which is one of the roads you can't right turn into, and feeding back to the council some of your requests that potentially the residents on that street should be exempted. And I think there is, as Anna has said, there is scope for changes both within the experimental period and for the full consultation at the end for us to try and get this right. But I hope that you do agree that it's a rat run, that the pavements are too narrow for them to be used really for the road to be, and for them to be used for social distancing, and that the road really is supposed to be freed up by these measures for all of it to be used for walking primarily, because like you say, it's very hard to cycle up, and for the cars to be removed. Now, if that goal isn't being achieved by the current signage, and I've been looking at the signage at the bottom of the hill and seeing maybe half the drivers seeing the signage and changing their route, and maybe half of them carrying on regardless. If that isn't working, I think we'd really welcome some suggestions as to how to get better compliance. I'm assuming residents are diverting, the goal of the scheme is not for everybody to drive circle around the village. The goal is for people to use one of the other two roads up to the village instead. So we'd really like to get some feedback from you on how we can improve that signage, and also some feedback on whether or not you're seeing any kind of gradual improvement over time as drivers learn that the best way to Highgate is no longer Swain's Lane.
Thank you. Mr. Stanners, do you wish to respond to all of the questions?
I would love to respond to all of them. This is not my métier, but I've been writing a few of them down. If I can deal with Councillor Pearson's points, first of all, I couldn't agree more. The cars go up Swain's Lane way too quickly, and it is dangerous, and it is only a matter of time before somebody who's not familiar with the road layout, particularly foreign tourists who go to the Karl Marx, etc., they will be harmed if we're not careful. The biggest problem, I think, of working out how many cars were using the Swain's Lane and how many are now using it is that we have not yet seen the schools go back. And when the schools do go back, I would be very surprised if we do not see an awful lot of confused people coming up Swain's Lane on a school run and then not able to get particularly to Channing School. And I think that's one of the solutions in all of this might be to try and persuade Channing to have fewer mothers and fathers dropping their children off at school gates. If I can then move on to Councillor Wright's points, I agree that this is an experimental measure, but our biggest problem with this is that full consultation could quite easily have taken place. It would only have required a couple of emails, and you would have had contact with probably 500 or more households. And it is a shame that the local residents most affected by this, which is particularly those on the western side of Pond Square, who are having the brunt of the new traffic inflicted upon them. It's a shame that they are not being more listened to. Moving on to Councillor Newman's points, first of all, I'll look at the route calculations. This sounds a bit silly, but I went out and bought a surveyor's wheel, those little wheels at the end of a stick. And I went out at 6 o'clock one Sunday morning, and I was wearing a high-vis jacket. I felt very official, and I measured all the distances. It took me about an hour and a half to do it because you have to compute all the different distances. So I'm pretty sure of my distance statistics. In terms of near misses, I'd rather call them actual hits. There's no doubt cars have been hit as a result of this, because cars unfamiliar with Pond Square are going down a very narrow, effectively a narrow track, and are having small accidents. But worse still, I have seen a cyclist nearly get knocked off his bike. And I know that my colleague or my confrère, Neil Perkins, who's listening into what I'm saying now, I gather he's seen quite a few cyclists nearly being injured by it.
Yeah, Edward and Madam Mayor, can I just interject very quickly here? Well, I just want to quickly add to Edward's point. I have lost count of the number of motorcyclists and cyclists mounting the pavement in order to overtake cars and vans. I have personally, and so a lot of my friends and people who run businesses in the square, seen countless examples of very near misses where pedestrians have had to take evasive action. And just on very quickly, the traffic flow has. I've lived there for 30 odd years, and I live there now. Obviously, the traffic has not reduced. All of that traffic that can't turn right is squeezing into Pond Square. Emissions are being increased. Pedestrians are at constant risk. This is literally suffocating Highgate, and it is a disaster waiting to happen. It's a disaster now for residents, very distressing, and something seriously bad will go wrong. There is serious risk to life here of this scheme right now, and it needs to be abandoned now. Two no right turn signs need to be taken away and proper consultation to take place. Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. I'm sorry for the.
Thank you. Okay.
May I, Madam Mayor, very quickly move on to Councillor Berry's comments?
Yeah, Mr. Sanders, do you mind just wrapping up? Yeah, over to you.
Right. We do not have all that strong links with Bisham, but I'm sure that they would be very welcome to know that they're going to be exempted. We agree that Swain's Lane is a rat run and that something needs to be done about it. And we certainly can't argue with the fact that the pavement is too narrow at the top and it's an extremely difficult problem to resolve. I think that the solution is something along the lines of chicanes, and if anyone wants to look at a very clever series of traffic measures, look near the Lancia pub on Holloway Road. It is extremely clever what they've done, admittedly over a long period of time, but they have significantly reduced the volumes without harming the well-being of the local neighbourhood. Madam Mayor, I will call it a draw at that. Thank you very, very much for having us on this evening.
On a point of information, the council said no when I asked if Bisham Gardens residents could be exempted, but I did ask. Just in case that gets recorded in the minutes.
We do not have strong links with Bisham, but I'm sure that they will be very glad to know that you are supporting their case.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stanners.
Thank you.
We'll move on to the Cabinet Member for Sustainable Camden, Councillor Harrison, to respond to the deputation. Councillor Harrison, you have 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. I'll try and fit it in. Thank you to the residents for coming tonight and for all the correspondence that we've engaged with over the summer. As I said in one of my emails, I've been reading them all, even if I haven't managed to quite respond to all of them. And your on-the-ground observations have been very helpful to us in making changes and improvements, some of which I'll come on to in a second. So it is actually valued very much, even if perhaps don't agree on all the detail. Clearly, for example, your mention of the Lancia, I'll have to go and check that out again. But the area you mentioned in Islington is actually well known for sort of low traffic neighbourhood measures. So I'll be happy to go over there and take a look and discuss that with you as well. I'm going to cover 3 things quickly if I can. One is what the purpose of the measure is. Second is the action taken since installation, and the third is just a point about the experimental nature and the full consultation to come. So as we've heard, the goal is to combat rat running up Swain's Lane, and I've been very clear about that since the start in our correspondence, and I think it is generally recognised from Mr. Sanders' remarks at the beginning. It is narrow up Swain's Lane. Those are really important access points, both into and out of Waterley Park, which do get high volumes of foot traffic with narrow pavements. You also have the nursery right at the top, actually, which I think is a sort of undermade point, but you do have a small nursery which we want to kind of avoid cars thundering past. And again, your point about Channing School, the junior schools on our side of the road, is well made, and that's something I will take up. Just stepping back a bit on the reasons and the goal, we have had clear instruction from the Department for Transport and the Mayor of London to be averting a rise in car use during COVID and an anticipated rise in the future. And we do want to spare local communities from the impact of increased cars down roads, and be encouraging people to use alternative, greener and healthier means. And there is quite a unity across levels of government on that. And we early on set up the commonplace map online to gather in people's ideas, which was extremely informative. And one of those was to address the issues identified on Swain's Lane. And that issue remains. And we know from the news at the weekend that the COVID figures are starting to look alarming again. On the actual numbers going using Swain's Lane, we do know from figures in 2019 that on an average weekday, you had 1,900 vehicles travelling north on Swain's Lane. The counts from July 2020, so since the scheme went in, we know that's fallen from 1,900 to 1,100. So there has been a reduction in traffic, and that's in contrast to what's happening in other parts of the borough, where levels are already at least at 91%, and in some places have already probably reached pre-COVID levels. So what's happening on Swain's Lane is the opposite to what's happening in other places, in all likelihood because of the measures we've taken.
Your time is, Councillor.
Okay, I haven't made everything then, but it's just worth saying that, there was a lot of traffic going through the village before. There is actually less now, and I'm very happy to keep working with the community on this.
Okay.